West and had several solo projects because you got brand new music coming out next month in March of 2020. Peter, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much, mate. This is about as close as I get to Chicago these days, which is a shame because I lived there for a little over a year at the end of the 90s. And
did you?
It's a fabulous city, as you know. So, yeah, absolutely.
I was in Los Angeles when I think you were in Los Angeles. Weren't you in there in like the mid 90s?
Yes, I relocated there at the beginning of 94 and was there for 5 years until I spent some time in Chicago just before the turn of the millennium, if that's the right expression.
So you go from Los Angeles to cold Chicago. What were you thinking, my friend?
You know, Chicago's fabulous in the summertime. I can remember sitting at a Cubs game and it was so hot, they sprayed the audience down, which was, I couldn't even believe it was happening at the time. But yeah, as you say, and I know Chicagoans know it's cold in the winter.
It is.
But I really enjoyed my time there.
Yeah, I need to go back to Los Angeles where it's 80 degrees and I could be tan year round. So I got spoiled.
Absolutely.
Now with this new music, before we start talking about some of the 80s and 90s, tell me about the new track that you have coming out next month. It's Too Far Gone, I believe is the name of the track.
Yes, thank you for the plug. It's called Too Far Gone. Like hundreds of other musicians during the COVID lockdown, I wrote some songs and fooled around with my little home demo studio and got people involved remotely, some fantastic players who helped me out. So I'm about 3/4 of the way to a complete album, and Too Far Gone is the first single from it, a song of blissful obsession. I'm working with the producer who was responsible for the first Go West album, the one that launched us in 1985. So there's an element of that 80s sound about the song.
So with that, it being a solo project, I mentioned that you have solo projects and you have band projects. How is the process different between those two?
Well, for better or worse, I have creative control. As Richard, my partner in Go West, is fond of saying, when we are writing together, it's not a situation where the roles are clearly defined. He doesn't allow me to write the words on my own, nor do I allow him to dictate the chord progressions. So we're elbowing our way in, if you like, all through the whole process. So it can be a bit of a head-butting situation, but hopefully when we are writing together, you get the best of both of us. That's in a perfect world. But when I'm on my own, obviously, I get to decide what the song's about and articulate it in my own way without interference. So there are some pros, but at the same time, during the process of writing and recording these songs for this forthcoming album, I was reminded, as if I needed to be, that what a luxury it was in 1984 to be in a tiny studio with four other guys, Richard, the engineer, Gary, the producer, and Dave, our keyboard synth programmer. So that when you went into work every day, not every single idea had to come from you, but when you're on your own, and I'm sure you can relate, you're on your own in your own little studio. It's all about you, and everything that happens or doesn't happen is all about you.
I always felt, I've had co-hosts on other shows, and what I lacked was that sounding board when I was going off the rails, like something didn't make sense. Well, I didn't have someone that could be my yin to my yang and tell me, well, that's not very good. Now, do you miss that if you're doing solo work without Richard?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, obviously, and it certainly means that, I hear about other artists who write a song in a day, and I think, well, that must be great, but that's not the way it is in my world. Partly because I'm highly self-critical, and partly because, I've been writing for a long time now. So while I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everything is blindingly original, I am trying to avoid certain things that I've done in the past. So it's as I say, pros and cons. It's nice to be in control. It's nice not to have an idea somewhat diluted if you feel strongly about it. But yes, I miss At times, I definitely miss the collaborative thing. But you can collaborate remotely.
Sure.
It just takes longer.
And we don't need any more yes men around us. Like, do you have a lot of those? Just like, oh, Peter, everything you do is, oh, it's just brilliant. It's just brilliant. So we don't.
I don't recognize that experience, actually, Steve. I think it's more, no, you don't want to do that. No. So no, I don't feel I'm surrounded by yes men at all.
Now, do you start with lyrics or melodies?
Typically, I'm fooling around on the guitar or on a keyboard. I'm not a great player of either instrument, but I can use them to write. And of course, like thousands of us out there, I'm reasonably adept with Pro Tools and my little home digital audio workshop. So typically it'll start with a chord progression and then I'll be humming a melody. The lyrics generally come last because that's I find those the most challenging, but rewarding at the same time when you are articulating the idea, as I say, with your own voice.
So it's hard to believe that you've been around 35 years. It's like overnight. I remember playing your singles in the 80s and 90s, and I can't believe both of us have been around that long. I don't know what that says for either one of us.
Yeah, bless you. I mean, it's we're gigging again now that lockdown is easing in the UK, and we had 35th anniversary shows scheduled, as you remark. Mm-hmm. But actually, now that we're playing them, it's our 37th anniversary. And of course, I met Richard long before we got a record deal. I've known Richard since he was 16 and I was a couple of years older. So we go back a very long way, as you say.
So how did the two of you meet and how did you decide that the two of you could write music together?
I don't know that there's been too many conscious decisions like that along the way, but we met because we were both big fans of the 70s rock band Free. I don't know if that means, wow. Yeah. So Paul Rodgers, who was the singer in that band, was an early inspiration. I still think he's arguably the best male singer this country, the UK, has produced.
Really?
So it wasn't, the band that I was in wasn't really a tribute band. I'm not even sure that concept existed back then, but we didn't have any original material. So all we did was get together in a little room behind the back of a store and thrash away at maximum volume, playing material by Free and Bad Company. And I read a review of Richard's band in the local newspaper, and clearly they were coming from the same place. So I went along to see them rehearsing, and Richard asked me if I had a tape. Some of your listeners won't know what that is, but in the day, I would carry a cassette tape of our single demo, the only demo that we had recorded. So I gave it to Richard and he listened to it and obviously liked what he heard. And not long after that, I got my first residency gig. This was the beginning of my paying my dues, singing in residency, covers, chart covers, 45-minute spot. And then there'd be a DJ and then another 45-minute spot. And it was in the north of England. Richard was still in the south, working for an advertising newspaper, selling advertising space. And every other weekend or so, he would drive the 200 miles up to where I was and bring with him videos of films and TV shows and all the music that he had bought. And, you know, in those days, I mean, we drank a lot of cheap wine together and listened to a lot of music that we weren't writing for some time. But it was around that time when he was schlepping up to the north to hang out with me, and you listen to music that we first started dabbling with writing together. But my listening had been fairly one note with the Free thing and Bad Company, and bands with keyboard players were not on my radar really. But Richard introduced me largely to West Coast American music, right. The Doobie Brothers, Michael McDonald, Steely Dan, those kinds of things, all of which I loved. And so broadened my horizons a bit. And hopefully we brought some of those influences into what we were doing when we started writing.
Now you have a very unique voice. If I was to play any single, your name, your voice and your name just jumps out. Okay. Kind of like a Paul Carrack album. You know who that is immediately. who did you want to be when you first started? You talk about Bad Company and Free, two unbelievable bands, but who did you want to sound like, or who did you think you sounded like?
Well, I wanted to sound exactly like Paul Rodgers because, you know, I just thought he was the business. And Free recorded a live album, or put out a live album. It was a collation of 2 gigs, I think. But, you know, there was a time when I could sing along with those vocal performances as best I could, note for note. I mean, I knew every ad lib, every little thing that he was doing. So that influence was profound, even though I might have moved on, you know, in the McDonald days. And of course, you know, even prior to listening to Free and Bad Company, the earlier part of my teenage soundtrack was Motown. So all of those fantastic, and of course, as we know now, live vocal performances. There was no doctoring, there was no dropping in, there was no fixing. The whole band and the singer were in the room, and it was a 3-track recorder. How does that work? Wow. And it was live, you know, and those vocal performances are still just incredible when you think that that's live to tape. So there were obviously loads of fantastic inspirations there. Marvin Gaye, you know, The Temptation, all those guys, all those records were, and that was immediately prior to my fixation with Free for some years. Sure. And of course, you know, Rodgers was coming from perhaps the soul, the Otis Redding,
very true,
Stax kind of era, which was around, yes. So was it the same time as Motown, or around those times? You know, he was like a blue-eyed soul singer. In my mind, he was anyway.
Yeah, him and Van Morrison, I would put together at that time with Motown and what their sound was. Yeah. So how did you get your voice? It's very unique. Is it something that you worked on? Was it something that just happened to start with? That was the voice. That was the voice that you were going to have with Go West and solo. And even when you talk about Michael McDonald's "What a Fool Believes." I've been listening to that cover, and I just went, wow. How do you cover a Doobie Brothers song and take that kind of risk?
Yes, it was cheeky, wasn't it? Yeah, it was a hard day's work, that as well, because I did all those higher BVs, and of course, inevitably, it's in a lower key than the Doobie Brothers version. People are very kind when they say, I feel as if people are very kind when they say, I have a distinct or identifiable voice. I'm not wired in such a way that I would say, hey, you know, my voice is unique. That's just not really where I'm coming from. I'm just, I've been singing in one context or another since I was, you know, pre-teen. When in England, I know that the school systems are different and they've changed since I was at school many times. But typically, you would move on to what was called your secondary education when you were 12. And my school had a connection to Hampton Court Palace, where Henry VIII, I don't know how the history is, mine's terrible, but it just so happened that Hampton Court Palace is not that far from where I live. And my school had a connection. And the reason I mention that is because my school had a connection to the Chapel Royal Choir at Hampton Court Palace. So I went along there as boys sopranos did, and I auditioned and I got into the choir, which was a fantastic ear training exercise because I couldn't read music then. I don't read music now. And typically each week, the sheet music would be handed out to the choristers, and I'd be looking at this thing, and my personality is such that my main agenda was not to make it take longer than it would have done if I hadn't been there. I didn't want to hold anybody up. So it by pressure or whatever, it taught me to pick up those melodies super quickly, as quickly as I could. So in that sense, it was a really good education. But that's not really what you asked me. I don't know, the voice, it just develops. I mean, if I take you back to when I was talking earlier about rehearsing at the back of a store in a soundproof room, to 4x12s and 100-watt amps for the guitar and bass, a drum kit about 6 feet from me, and I've got a SM58, and I'm singing through 2 tiny little columns. Nobody could hear anything I was doing. But the advantage of that, of course, was hopefully it helped me to get rid of some self-consciousness. And also, you know, I could shout and shout and shout without fear of being criticized because no one could hear anything I was doing. So I think in an odd kind of way, that was a part of the development of the voice. And then when we did get in the studio, we started making the first Go West album. Gary Stevenson, the producer, and Dave, the keyboard player who was in Gary's band, they were big Trevor Horn fans, Buggles and Adventures in Modern Recording, which was a light year from where I was coming from. I always joke about Gary affectionately that he kind of went from Thin Lizzy to Yes in one big step, bypassing black music of any kind. So there were some influences that we had in common and some that we really didn't. And Gary would, again, hopefully affectionately, you know, make some fun of my bluesy inspirations and where I was coming from. So again, you know, in an odd kind of way, he had an effect on making me consider again certain things that I might have done had I been left to my own devices at that time. So there was Gary had a big thing about being modern, you know, and in his mind, when I met him, I was not a modern singer. So those guys had an effect. But ultimately, you know, it's still the same now when I'm playing live, when we're playing live and I'm singing live, you get in front of a crowd, whether it's 3 guys in the control room in a recording studio or hopefully thousands of people at a music festival, something had better happen. Something had better happen. I can't, you know, it's just, I'm not a natural show off, but if I'm standing there and people are, you know, looking at the band, watching the band, expecting something to happen, I feel that something should happen. I feel a responsibility that I need to I perform. So yeah, so I'm always giving it 100%, even when 100% isn't necessarily as accurate or as perfect as you might like it to be.
Yeah, so you still get a buzz when you step on stage, right? You know, it's just something about that energy.
Absolutely. And, you know, and again, it might sound twee, but, you know, I've seen a lot of people talking about how grateful they are that we're back now playing live. And you know, I'm really very aware of how lucky I have been to be in the right place at the right time, for example, several times in my career, where it's more about that than it is about how hard you work. Although that, of course, is also important. But yeah, I feel very lucky. And had you said to me in 1985, you'll still be doing this in 37 years' time, I might have said, I think that's unlikely, but here we are.
Right. Here we still are. You can't get rid of me. And let's face it, music can't get rid of you either. That's the way it should be.
I think I've lost you, Steve.